Where is your Chicago address?
Trenier Hotel, 40th and Grand Boulevard.
You were playing professional ball with the White Sox in the season of 1919, were you?
Yes, sir.
You played in the World Series between the Chicago Americans Baseball Club and the Cincinnati Baseball Club, did you?
I did.
Were you present at a meeting at the Ansonia Hotel in New York about 2 or 3 weeks before, a conference there with a number of ball players?
I was not. No, sir.
Did anybody pay you any money to help throw that series in favor of Cincinnati?
They did.
How much did they pay?
They promised me $20,000, and they paid me $5,000.
Let's pause right here. Being questioned on the stand is the Southern boy Joe Jackson, who would die without ever learning how to read or write. As you just heard, he was a part of the 1919 Chicago White Sox team, who lost in the World Series. You may have also caught his admitting to being paid $5,000 to throw that series. So there it is. Confession. A guilty party sitting up there and spilling everything. Let's go home. If only it was that easy. Joe Jackson may very well be placed among the Irvin Johnsons of sport, a rare category when one becomes so synonymous with a nickname that many no longer recognize their real one. Joe grew up poor, bouncing around South Carolina cities where everyone else was poor. He started working in the textile mills when he was just 6 years old, education being a privilege the family just couldn't afford. His illiteracy would follow him his whole life and have unimaginable impacts on it.
Where do you live, Mr. Jackson?
You mean in the city here?
Where is your home?
Greenville, South Carolina.
What is your business?
Baseball player.
Joe's ability on a baseball field outshined everything else. He could hit, run, throw, and field. He started off pitching, but after breaking a kid's arm with a fastball, he was dropped back into the outfield. One game, his brand new cleats gave him such bad blisters that he kicked them off before batting. As Joe tended to do, he nailed a stand-up triple into right field. Dashing around the bases in nothing but his knee-high socks, a fan shouted out, "You shoeless son of a gun!" The name stuck. 10 years later, Shoeless Joe Jackson was a major league superstar. He hit .408 one season, only losing the batting title to Ty Cobb. He hit over .370 4 straight years. He won a World Series in 1917. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out that when you're running around shoeless, your socks are bound to get dirty. The court adjourns. Reporters and curious fans pile out. After 2 hours on the stand, Shoeless Joe stumbles down and heads for the bar. It's unclear, and will actually be debated for years, whether he was drunk when giving this confession, but he definitely was not long after. What else is known for sure is that right before he gave it, a lawyer had persuaded Joe into signing a contract he couldn't read, promising him it was the best thing for his innocence. What the lawyer didn't tell Joe was that he was signing a waiver of immunity, practically the exact opposite. The very next day, Lefty Williams, a star White Sox pitcher, was called up to spill his secrets. His testimony would paint a vivid picture of the events that led us here.
I want you to mention the names of the gamblers, the places, the times, and everyone you talked to about the whole subject. The situation was first brought up to me in New York. Mr. Gandil called me to one side, out in front of the Hotel Ansonia, and put this thing to me. After coming back to Chicago, I was called down to the Warner Hotel, where the 8 members that are named. Not 8, I'll take that back. I'll name them for you. Eddie Seacup, Chick Gandil, Buck Weaver, and Happy Felch, and 2 fellas introduced as Brown and Sullivan. They were the gamblers? They were supposed to be the gamblers, or the fellas that were fixing it for the gamblers. One of the two, they didn't say which.
This meeting, taking place at a New York hotel with 5 White Sox and 2 fixers, was just weeks before the start of the 1919 World Series. A bit of background on the team, sport, and time period provides some much-needed context to the situation. A SparkNotes graph of gambling in baseball up to this point reveals a trend recently spiking back up. Towards the end of the American Civil War, the level of play quickly increased, and with it the numbers being wagered. Nationwide popularity jumbled with underground corruption to fuel an openly poisonous fire. The sport was quickly changing, not for the better, but for the betters. On one occasion, a player was assaulted by rocks and stones as he attempted to catch a game-winning fly ball to ensure an upset. Another gambler ran on the diamond in a game and just tackled a ball player to cash his bets. The worst of it may have been an outfielder having the ground around his feet peppered with literal bullets to stop him from reeling in a fly ball. But as the game aged and only grew more popular, baseball started turning to a respected national institution, enough to tug at the morals of even hotshot gamblers. This gave it a sort of band-aid, with corruption and dishonesty in the sport naturally healing over time. Bat and stick slowly became the essence of America. That band-aid was ripped off in an instant upon the dawning of World War I. Horse racing tracks were shut down, but baseball, due to its newfound position of a national pastime, was given the green light to resume play, albeit with lessened rosters and attendance. Thus, the real high rollers, who lived and died by the horses, simply switched their focus onto baseball. In the 5 years between the war's start and the Black Sox scandal, 3 out of 5 World Series have heavy suspicions of potential foul play. In that same time period, an MLB coach, umpire, owner, and team doctor were all individually banned for life on separate occasions for fixing games. Corruption returned to all levels of the sport. In private, Major League Baseball was panicked. The 3-man power system they had in place was simply not working, and they were attempting to work towards a solution that would eventually become the commissioner role. In public, though, as the league tended to do, they swept these under the rug as best they could to protect the idea of the game's integrity. Baseball knew it was in danger of losing credibility and thus losing everything. The 1919 season was the first one back from war. It was yet to be seen just how the return to normal life would affect baseball's ugly public secret. Snatching the National League pennant with relative ease was the Cincinnati Reds. They were led by a first-year manager who had to replace the old skipper because he was accidentally gassed in a chemical training exercise while serving in the war and developed tuberculosis. These things happen. Throughout the year, the Cincinnati Ball Club, viewed as naturally having inferior talent compared to East Coast teams, were beating everyone so easily, it made some New York sports writers, half seriously, suggest the idea that teams were throwing games to the Reds because no one wanted the second-place Giants to win the pennant. But still, no one really thought they'd have a shot against the monsters coming out of the American League. The Chicago White Sox were favored in every aspect of the game. 2 years fresh off a World Series win, they had studs, led by one of the best in Shoeless Joe. They had the massive traveling fan base, and they had all the money being bet their way. As of a couple weeks before the series, odds were hovering around 5-1 in favor of the Sox. Funny enough, it's possible, though unconfirmed, that this club was already somewhat known by the nickname of the Black Sox, not because of any dirty money, but because of dirty laundry. Charles Comiskey, the team's notoriously cheap owner, refused to pay to clean his team's uniforms, and they protested by just not cleaning them. They showed up to multiple games in a row, with their white scrubs getting progressively more disgusting. Eventually, Comiskey, nicknamed the Old Roman for his resemblance of an ancient leader, seemingly gave in and washed them all on his own dime. He then took the laundry money individually out of each of his players' salaries. This was an era with no free agency, no player power. You were stuck to one team unless your owner let you go. Stories about Comiskey lowballing and screwing players over, though often heavily exaggerated, are vast. For example, after promising a bonus to the players if they won the 1917 World Series, which they did, he presented that the bonus was a case of flat champagne waiting in the locker room to celebrate with. We'll talk more about some of the controversy with Comiskey a little later. For now, we eavesdrop back in on that Chicago meeting outside the hotel, not long before Game 1 of the series, as described by Lefty Williams. You wouldn't call this the birth of the fix, but it is the first group meeting held discussing the idea. Chick Gandil, one of the 5 players present, could most accurately be described as the ringleader. He had some connections with a few B-tier gamblers that knew some people. At some point, the idea was proposed by Gandil, not the gamblers, that he could throw the World Series if the price was right. Chick recruited the 4 teammates in secrecy to the plan, bringing us to this meeting here. The 2 gamblers, less people and more puppets, acting on behalf of much bigger fish, laid it out simply. They could offer $100,000 in total to lose the series. With low odds on Cincinnati, gamblers in the know were about to make a whole lot of money betting on them. There's 5 players here, which would indicate a split of $20,000 each. However, this topic was only vaguely discussed at the meeting. No cash whatsoever was shown by the gamblers.
And you would know them if you saw them? I would, sure. I would know them. Go on. Well, I was informed that whether or not I took any action, games would be fixed. Who informed you of that? Chick Gandil. Right then and there? No, not right then and there. Just right after that. I got into the hall, so I told them anything they did would be agreeable to me. If it was going to be done anyway, that I had no money, I might as well get what I could. I haven't seen those gamblers from that day to this.
Chick Gandil was likely bluffing in this described interaction. Lefty Williams was a key starting pitcher, and the plan would have been tough to follow through without his inclusion. Luckily, the tactic worked as he planned. Lefty, like many ballplayers in 1919, was not the brightest cookie in the dishwasher. You could convince him to do a lot of things, especially when you're telling him it'll pay his mortgage off. Gandil would individually approach 2 more White Sox players not present at this meeting, one Shoeless Joe Jackson, the other Swede Risberg, to get them on board with the plan. Jackson's absence at the first meeting is noteworthy, confirming his own testimony to suggest he wasn't in on it from the start. Initially, he too declined Gandil's offer, but the first baseman was persistent enough to make Shoeless give in. Another teammate, Fred McMullen, overheard some pairing of the guys sloppily discussing their plan in the locker room, only to demand he be included or he would spill the beans. The number of players rose, now to 8 total. The pot to be split remained the same at $100,000. Each player's share was already being dwindled, and discussion between the teammates about all of this was dubious at best and non-existent at worst. They just kinda assumed it would all work out. This was not a mafia operation. Pitcher Eddie Seacott, scheduled to start Game 1, was the only player to demand his money up front. If there was any reason for why these 8 men specifically were chosen and the rest of the team left out, it was likely predetermined, outside of maybe the eavesdropping McMullen. On the White Sox, the past couple years, existed a clear divide down the middle of the team. What began as the squad getting a little cliquey, guys hanging out with some teammates and not others, would slowly morph into a fractioning of 2 separate groups that we in the future now refer to as the Black Sox and the Clean Sox. It creates an interesting dilemma on the team, where 2 sides already didn't like each other, but now one of them was actively trying to lose games. This is another point of contention as to just how much of an impact this team-wide rift really played, or if it's been over-exaggerated through history. The scheme continued over the following days up to Game 1 in what could be shown as an 80s montage, with different groupings of the 8 dirty players talking about it together behind closed doors. They would sometimes meet all together, taking little precaution other than leaving the room at different times. It wouldn't have been tough to spot something coming together.
The deal that the players ended up agreeing to was for $100,000, with 40 of it up front and $20,000 after each of the first 3 losses. The money was to be supplied by some unknown big shot gambling boss. The players were working with a variety of street-level gamblers in this weird situation where everyone was sort of working together but also only looking out for their own best interest and willing to screw anyone over. Now, funny enough, it would come to be seen that both sets of gamblers were likely unknowingly taking orders and being supplied with money by the same man.
On September 29th, 2 days before Game 1 of the World Series, one of the henchmen for the big boss, a former ball player named Sleepy Bill Burns, received a telegram informing him of an incoming $40,000 wire transfer. At the bottom were the initials AR. Sleepy Bill took the $40,000, started walking to bring it to the players, stopped, turned, and took it right to a gambling hall. Attempting to double-cross his boss and everyone else, he tried putting $30,000 on the Reds to win the series, only to be informed that the odds had completely shifted to even money. In that moment, he instantly knew that his boss, the mysterious high-rolling gambler funding the whole operation, had beat him to the punch. He expected this from his henchmen, so he already put down the big money and shifted the odds entirely. Reluctantly, Sleepy Bill placed a Game 1 bet on the Reds with even odds for $29,000. He pocketed $1,000 and took the other $10,000 to Chick Gandil. As one might imagine, Gandil, seeing $10,000 when he was promised $40,000, was not a happy chicklet. Sleepy Bill gave him little attention nor choice and threw down the $10,000. "It's all out on bets," he told him. "This is all you're getting." After attempting to protest, Gandil realized he really didn't have a choice. He pocketed the money. It was a frightening feeling of helplessness he'd never had before. Over the next 10 days, it would become much more normal. Instead of splitting $40,000 among the players, he knew he had to give all $10,000 to Eddie Cicotte, the starting pitcher for Game 1. A pitcher, after all, has the most control over the ballgame and can give the best guarantee of actually losing it. And Eddie had demanded he receive his money before Game 1, or the only thing he'd be throwing was gas. Later that same night, Eddie Cicotte got ready for bed in his hotel room. His pillow was propped up oddly. Carefully hidden under it was $10,000 in cash. He sewed the money into the lining of a jacket and went to sleep. The rest of the Black Sox were unpleased, but just like Chick Gandil, they were able to quickly come to the realization that there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. Lefty Williams finishes his candid story and steps down to take a seat. His confession was the third and final of the past 2 days, following Shoeless Joe's and Eddie Cicotte's. All three chose to make statements on their own will, but were also each persuaded into signing waivers of immunity under possibly false pretenses. This was late September of 1920, almost a year since the series. Just a couple weeks later, 8 White Sox players and 5 gamblers were charged with conspiracy to defraud, including the 3 who just spoke in front of a grand jury based on their own words. The full Black Sox trial would begin about 6 months later, in June of 1921. The time in between would be anything but routine. The 3 confessions of Cicotte, Shoeless, and Lefty were stolen from the state attorney's office by someone that kind of remains a mystery to this day. What the prosecutor's case was leaning on to go after the Black Sox, and all 3 of them vanished. Luckily, contrary to popular belief, this theft was discovered well before the trial began, and with the help of court stenographers, they were able to piece the 3 testimonies back together, and the theft did not end up playing a major role in this trial. A jury was selected over a process that was not easy or quick. A Chicago trial trying to find the non-baseball fans is like Shoeless trying to find the vowels, but it was done. After 600 total prospects, an impartial jury was chosen. The players had some hotshot lawyers, the best in Chi-Town, that they normally would not have been able to even afford. Their sugar daddy, it would be revealed, was actually Charles Comiskey, who stepped in to take care of all his players' attorney bills. It's a generous move from the old Roman with selfish motivations too. Despite being a possibly wronged party, he wanted his boys to win the trial. 8 of his best players being arrested would not exactly bode well for the futures of his baseball team. Early on in the trial, Shoeless Joe, Eddie Seacott, and Lefty Williams, the 3 who had confessed, all recanted their confessions completely. They didn't say they were wrong or slipped up, they just flat out denied ever saying the recorded words. The court of law works in beautifully mysterious ways. It was over the next few weeks in this courtroom, through the course of evidence being laid out and witnesses being questioned, that much of the full story would come to light. A prosecutor stood up and laid out his case. It was more than compelling. Along with some added details that we can thank the last 105 years for, it went a little something like this. In Cincinnati, the big boys were coming to show them how real ball's played. The city, electric, a baseball fever that can't be understood today. People are renting out rooms in houses, stores are closed, fans packed together like cigarettes in the stands. Game 1 of the World Series is upon us. But what many don't know, the people who paid to watch don't know, what the little kid tugging at his dad's sleeve doesn't know, is that the fix is in. The game, the series, is a sham. Fans are about to unknowingly be deceived with nothing more than a propped-up million-dollar lie. It's a masterful job from the prosecutor of world-building and humanizing baseball's fandom. He's attempted to make a play on the jury's emotion, relating themselves to these innocent fans. It worked rather well. Now, that's not to say the fix is unknown. There's fearful whispers between journalists, suspicions from coaches and managers, rumors flooding mouth to mouth through the stands. Some reporters in the press box who were tipped off have quietly agreed to circle any play that stands out as odd with a red marker to keep track. Many have advised their readers not to bet on the series at all. Those in the know have varying levels of doubt. And as we know, the betting market was sure as hell tipped off to something. It's not just the influx of money, it's the smart money, the big-time players and known gamblers who are going all in on red. The cover-up excuse given at the time was that White Sox Game 1 pitcher Eddie Seacott had a sore arm. Eddie Seacott stands in the eye of the hurricane, the pitcher's mound, a sanctuary to house him. In this moment, he has no idea quite how much he is the centerpiece of professional baseball's future. Seacott is working off maybe the best pitching season in Major League Baseball this year, along with 2 hours of sleep the night before. Some of those dirty rumors managed to reach the hotel telephones of multiple White Sox, including some of the clean ones. We don't know exactly what anyone said over those phones. There was probably yellers from both sides of the wall. Hey, this is Seacott? Yeah? Who's this? Doesn't matter. Just make sure everything goes right tomorrow. The pitcher, who had won more games than anyone else this season, was in quite the position. The only thing left was to go through with it. The players had agreed on a sort of signal from Seacott to indicate that the fix was on. It wasn't a tough one to spot. He would beam the first batter. The world crescendoed, hushed, and then held its breath. The White Sox batted first and got nothing going. To open the bottom half of the inning, Eddie Seacott rose high and followed through heavily on his opening pitch. It blew right through the middle of the strike zone. The opposing crowd jeered. Some sighed a bit of relief. He followed with the very same windup on his next pitch. This one was far inside. The batter turned in, and the ball struck him right in between the shoulder blades. The real game was on. Flash forward to a 1-1 game in the 4th inning. Not much has stood out. The only red circle on the sheets was a first inning error by Chick Gandil that was followed by some nervous glances in the box. It should be noted that this was a period in pro baseball where errors were much more prevalent than the modern game. But when Seacott stepped up in the latter half of the 4th, he took it upon himself as he felt the need to do with $10,000 dirty dollars in his hotel room to make the gamblers happy. He'd allowed just a single hit and a single run so far, but when Swede Risberg, in on the fix, botched a should-be double play, a rally got started. Cincinnati picked up 6 hits and 5 runs in the 4th inning alone. Seacott was pulled after 3 2/3. The White Sox never scored again and enjoyed a 9-1 loss. It would begin what some thought was a statistically impossible batting slump for the slugging White Sox. Shoeless Joe Jackson went 0 for 4 in the contest, though he did score the team's only run after reaching base on error. The locker room was a tale of two cities. Grunts and sighs, sad faces, a mixture of genuine and doing their best Charlie Chaplin. The dirty players' emotion wouldn't have been pure joy, there likely would have been guilt, fear, anxiety, all stirring around. Seacott, today's losing pitcher, was still the only one who had seen a dime. Luckily, with the loss, they'd earned another $20,000 that was probably on its way right now. A young Chicago businessman by the name of Sammy Pass, who was a die-hard fan, close with much of the team, tried to lighten the mood back at the hotel. He'd already lost some money betting on the Sox today, and he was ready to throw some more on them tomorrow.
We'll get them, guys, don't worry. At least we better. I've got 3,000 soldiers marching on you guys.
Lefty Williams, scheduled to start Game 2, in a moment of over-honesty and mindlessness, quietly muttered,
I don't think you should go risking your money on us, Sammy.
What do you mean, Lefty? Isn't your arm all right?
Oh, my arm's alright, but, anything can happen in baseball.
Later that night, Chet Gandil entered Lefty Williams' room with a stressful look on his face. He had no money for him. He relayed to Lefty the same story the gamblers had told him maybe a half hour earlier. Stuff like this happens in the gambling world. The money goes in, gets on bets. It'll be here tomorrow, after you lose. Not to worry. Chick worried. How could you expect Lefty to throw a bad game when he hadn't seen a single dollar? Was he supposed to believe the promise of men who had already lied directly to them? The two crooked ball players, first baseman and pitcher, anxious and dejected, stood there in Lefty's room thinking to themselves. Again, that feeling of hopelessness dawned over each of them. Game 2 would carry a similar fervor in the city of Cincinnati. I should also make it clear that this World Series was a best of 9 rather than a best of 7. For Cincinnati, the very real Slim Saley was pitching and likely did stand up a number of times throughout the game. A penniless Lefty Williams was still going to go through with the fix. He was, however, advised to be a little less obvious than Seacott was in Game 1. More and more people were starting to get tipped off to something foul in the air as public perception of innocence slowly shifted. Lefty played his part alright. He went all 8 innings, let in 4 runs, and lost the ballgame. The Sox scored twice, but notably went 0 for 7 with runners in scoring position. And unfortunately for Lefty, while the pitcher position is the easiest to lose a game at, the catcher probably has the best chance to notice what you're doing. And future Hall of Famer Ray Schock was not in on the fix and was not happy. All game, Lefty dodged his signals and threw out junk over the plate. The clean Sox had heard plenty of rumors, but now Schock had witnessed it firsthand. He entirely lost trust in his teammates. Outside the clubhouse, Schock called Lefty over. He tried to dismiss the catcher, but Schock grabbed his arm, pulled him to the side, and began beating on him violently with both fists. Teammates heard an offhanded scream and rushed to break up the brawl. The world's suspicions were being confirmed right in front of their faces if you just looked hard enough.
I'm forever blowing ball games, pretty ball games in the air. I come from Chi, I hardly try. Just go to bat and fade and die. Fortune's coming my way, that's why I don't care. I'm forever blowing ball games, and the gamblers treat us fair.
Game 3, the Gamblers saw their opportunity and greedily struck. With Dickie Kerr, a clean sock, scheduled to pitch, the 8 didn't have as much control over the ballgame. That was okay. They were probably instructed to win this one. A victory in Game 3 for Chicago would get the odds swinging back in their direction and bring the potential for more money betting against them. It could be called poetic justice that this piece of information was only revealed to one pair of the gambling henchmen, Brown and Sullivan.
Enraged at a lack of payments, the dirty players decided not to tell the other group of gamblers, including Sleepy Bill, and just kept them in the dark.
Sleepy Bill thus went and took all his money that he had won in both Games 1 and 2, and, naturally, staked it all right back on Game 3. It was a sequence of events that very well may have been a direct link to the entire scandal becoming so public. Even if the Sox wanted to throw Game 3, it would have been hard. Dickie Kerr pitched a complete game shutout, and the weak 3 runs the Sox produced were more than enough to get the job done. Chicago could take a deep breath and avoid at least 24 hours of accusations. Sleepy Bill Burns was not happy when he inevitably sat down with Chick Gandil and an unspecified couple other dirty Sox. He furiously questioned why they double-crossed him. The players, sick of his demands without cash, had a laugh at his expense. Burns, disgusted, announced that it was over. The deal was done. No more fix. He then had the audacity to demand his 10% share of the measly $10,000 he had already delivered to the players. If you would recall, the deal that had been agreed to should have netted the players $60,000 total dollars by now. Rather than give the now penniless Burns his $1,000, Gandil replied, "Sorry, Bill. It's all out on bets." If any of these guys were able to enjoy a true laugh over the last few days, it was right after that. Sleepy Bill Burns walked out of the hotel room and wouldn't be seen by another Black Sox until they were all in the same courtroom. It was an enjoyable perception of power for the players that was momentary at best. But the fix was still on. As they met with the more up-to-date set of gambling henchmen, that was made clear. Demands were made and, predictably, had no green legs to stand on. The fix was able to get going again in Game 4 with a 2-run loss. This brought Seacott's World Series record to 0-2. A payment, albeit far from what they should have been, was given. Lefty Williams received 2 envelopes with $5,000 in each of them. He pocketed both, walked up to his friend Joe Jackson's room, and set one on his bed. Neither of them said a word. Shoeless took his money, and Lefty exited stage right. As this came out in the courtroom and the public learned that Joe Jackson really took cold hard cash, fans of the superstar felt betrayed. And thus a famous story was birthed that, while fictional, is worth bringing up. On Shoeless Joe's way into the courthouse one day, a story says, amongst the flashing pictures and chipper reporters, a kid brought everyone to silence with his question. "Say it ain't so, Joe." By the start of Game 5, with the Reds leading 3-1, you could call the potential of a World Series fix a public secret. Reds players goaded the Dirty Sox by asking them to drop a ball on their next at-bat. They obliged. The Sox made 3 errors in a 5-0 loss. Lefty Williams and Eddie Seacott now both proudly boasted 0-2 World Series records. Down 4-1, the Chicago White Sox would then win back-to-back games, pushing the series to an unprecedented 8th match. These 2 wins are, again, the subject of false facts and mystery. The unfortunate truth is that there's no real proof why the White Sox rallied to win these 2 games. There's plenty of potential reasons. The Gamblers could have asked again to improve their odds by having the White Sox stage a comeback surge. Another reason could be the players, after a lack of payments, attempting to double-cross the Gamblers and win the series anyway. In the book 8 Men Out, Asanoff presents another theory involving the supernatural force of athletes simply not being able to let up when they get going. No matter what's thrown at them, when a fired-up ball club is rolling, there's not a lot that's going to stop them. However it happened, the Sox would complete their duty in Game 8 and lose the World Series. It was Lefty Williams' 3rd loss in the series, which set an MLB record that would stand for over 50 years. He got one single out in the last game and was pulled in the first inning after allowing 4 runs. It's unclear exactly when payments were made through the later games, but each player's total income has been likely confirmed. The 8 Black Sox made out as follows: Joe Jackson, $5,000. Lefty Williams, $5,000. Fred McMullen, $5,000. Swede Risberg, $5,000. Happy Felch, $5,000. Buck Weaver, $0. Eddie Seacott, $10,000. Chick Gandil, $35,000. If these numbers are to be believed, there's a lot to be said. Buck Weaver likely had the best case for reinstatement because of this. He would request a separate trial from his teammates since he received no money, but that request was denied. Fred McMullen eavesdropped his way to $5,000, and he had a set of ears that backed that statement. Eddie Seacott was extremely smart in demanding his money up front and actually got what he was promised. And ringleader Chick Gandil, through all the double crosses going on, probably got one over on his teammates and did not distribute all the money. The players, again, if we believe these, netted a total of $70,000, only 30% short of what they were promised, but were arguably screwed over by their teammate worse than the gamblers. As the prosecutor rests his case and prepares a final statement, the picture seemed rather clear. The so-called killer witness in the case, supplying much of it, was Sleepy Bill Burns, that gambler who was double-crossed by the players and left with a grudge. We should also focus in on the exact fraud charges the Black Sox were facing. There was no law explicitly about rigging a baseball game to hit them with. They were thus smacked with things like conspiracy to commit a confidence game and conspiracy to defraud businesses, teammates, and the public. Asanoff, in his book, presumes that the entire courtroom, judge, and jury knew the White Sox threw games. It was about pinning them for these specific charges. A huge trial win for the players came when their lawyer presented the total gate receipts for White Sox owner Charles Comiskey over the 1919 and more recent 1920 seasons. Despite charges that they injured the business of the White Sox owner, the 1920 season trumped the past one in gross revenue. The jury was said to let out an audible gasp at this reveal. The closing argument for the prosecution began exactly like this. What more convincing proof do you want on the statement made by the ballplayers? Joe Jackson, Eddie Seacott, and Williams sold out the American public for a paltry $20,000. They collected the money, but they could not keep quiet. Their consciences would not let them rest.
When he finished, the jury debated amongst themselves to find a verdict. Less than 3 hours later, they had one. A recreation of the next moments in court goes as follows.
Gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The judge nods his head. The world holds its breath. We, the jury, the foreman announces, very slowly, find the defendant, Claude Williams, not guilty on all charges. We find the defendant, Edward Seacott, not guilty on all charges. We find the defendant, Joseph Jackson, not guilty on all charges. The courtroom exploded. Men and children burst out in joy. The jury jumped up with the rest of the room in celebration. Happy cries echoed through the streets. Ironically enough, a World Series-esque celebration went down in Chicago that day. Just how this happened, like most points of contention in this story, will be debated for long after this video is posted. No matter what, 8 dirty baseball players walked free of the law. Now, do keep in mind, you yourself likely don't think being acquitted means you didn't do it. If you don't believe me, maybe you believe me now. You can boil down the verdict into one of 2 possible outcomes. Like we touched on, the jury could have known games were thrown, but simply didn't have enough evidence of the specific laws they were accused of to find guilty. On the other side of the fence, the verdict may be easier explained by a phenomenon known as jury nullification. This is a process where a jury chooses to acquit despite believing there's guilt and knowingly goes against the evidence presented. It's often done to make a statement, objecting the law or its application in the specific case. The power can be used to send a message to a community at large, an outcome many have chosen to believe in this specific case.
However they got there, the Black Sox were legally clean, free men. Unfortunately, the waters were in no way clear. Allow us to revisit Major League Baseball and its lovely relationship with the gambling world. Now, because of the Black Sox, it's at the worst level the sport would ever reach. The league, embarrassed, on the brink of losing its entire reputation, made their big move. Less than a year before the Sox were found not guilty, Kennesaw Mountain Landis was elected as the first ever sole, full power wielding commissioner over all of Major League Baseball, down to the Bat Boys. They entrusted everything in him to take full control of the sport. He would do just that, banning more people during his tenure than had been done the previous 55 years before him. No commissioner has passed him since either. He decided to make the Black Sox into his example. His famous statement, not long after being appointed, is really all you need to hear. Regardless of the verdict of juries, no player that throws a ball game, no player that entertains proposals or promises to throw a game, no player that sits in a conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing games are discussed, and does not promptly tell his club about it, will ever again play professional baseball. The 8 players were each banned from Major League Baseball for life. Most of them would spend their days working, playing ball in whatever league took them, sometimes under fake names, and asking, even begging, to be let back into the majors. None ever would be. The last of the 8 Black Sox passed away over 50 years ago. Charles Comiskey, the Chicago White Sox owner, is an interesting case to study. His cheapness has been factually overblown and created a popular narrative around him, much due to Asinoff's book and much debatably true. However, later accounts from his own players served to back up the allegations of douchebaggery, even though he generally kept a payroll in the top half of the league. A story that is the perfect addition to this debate is what he did after he found out about the fix. Comiskey wrote a check to all of the clean White Sox for $1,500, the difference between what the winners and losers of the World Series brought home. It's a generous notion, comiskified by the fact that the true difference between winner and loser take-home was $1,900. He shorted all of them $400 for who knows why. The distaste for him has legs to stand on, but it may also be more indicative of a widespread hatred of all owners among all players due to rules at the time that many have compared to slavery. Some blame Comiskey and the built-up resentment that players grew towards his actions for being what pushed them to throw the series. Nevertheless, he supported the decision to ban some of the best of his own ball club, knowing damn well they would take a hit in performance. And that they did, never competing for another pennant while Comiskey lived. The franchise's next World Series win would not come for 88 years. The Dirty Sox were never let into a laundry machine. The timing of the scandal is prophetic. The 1920s, a decade still remembered 100 years later for corruption, crime, bootlegging, and law breaking, was appropriately baptized by the biggest controversy American sports have ever seen. The league constantly, up to present day, has refused to reverse the decision of any of the players' bans, despite heavy campaigns popping up for different guys spontaneously. Their reason of needing a no-exception system to maintain public credibility is harder for us to understand than it was in 1921. As pro baseball's gone through commissioners, the now unspoken agreement there seems to be that there's nothing we have today that should make us reverse the well-thought-out decision of a man from 100 years ago, when he had far more context than we do. If any were to be unbanned in memoriam, Buck Weaver or Shoeless Joe Jackson would have to be the one to break out of purgatory.
Weaver didn't make a dime and played an excellent series, hitting .324 with 11 hits. He was the team's second best hitter. Their best was also dirty. Shoeless Joe Jackson is remembered by some as a liar and a cheat, and by others as one of the greatest natural hitters to ever live. Despite debates that will never end over his effort in the series, certain games, specific at-bats, he had one of the greatest World Series of all time. He hit .375, a World Series record, 12 hits, did not make a single fielding error, and he hit the only home run of the series from either team. His at-bats in certain situations can and have been analyzed. I'll link one really well-thought analysis down below that basically takes you pitch by pitch and explains in detail every situation. But there will still be debates. Contradictions with Shoeless are what we just can't get past. He admitted to taking the $5,000, then spent a large part of his later life denying any wrongdoing or involvement whatsoever. Many people do often forget to read his whole confession, where Shoeless, never a master of words, insisted he did nothing to throw the series and that he played to win, just minutes after admitting he took the money. But giving him the benefit of the doubt when he had $5,000 in his pocket is hard to do, even with some pretty stats. That said, if Shoeless threw the series and tried to make it look like he didn't by hitting really good in unimportant moments, well then he did a hell of a job, because he still has us unsure over 100 years later. Joe's illiteracy has also been seemingly overblown in the last 50 or so years, likely because of how jarring the idea of a pro athlete unable to read or write is today. He couldn't do either of those things. His wife would usually read and sign contracts for him. At restaurants, he would wait for someone to order and then just get the same thing because he didn't understand the menu. These are true facts. Funny enough, it's made a real Shoeless Joe autograph one of the rarest things in all of sports, with less than 25 confirmed in existence. But even with all this, he wasn't necessarily a stupid person. Joe ran businesses during his post-baseball life and even a pool hall while he was playing. The man could handle himself and get through life on his own, and he did just that. He'd live out his life as a normal guy, pleading his innocence. Alrighty, here it is. I've kept one secret from you this whole video. Who was supplying the money? Who was sending those telegrams of tens of thousands of dollars? Who was the puppet master behind the scheme? Who the hell's initials were AR? Well, the high-rolling gambler who masterminded the World Series fix was reportedly, supposedly, a man named Arnold Rothstein. Your favorite criminal's favorite criminal, the godfather of American organized crime, the big bankroll himself. Everything, including a character based off him in The Great Gatsby, points to Rothstein being the man at the top of the pyramid, organizing the fix by dropping different orders down to different henchmen and somehow getting everyone confused but still knowing what was going on. It was all probably a well-calculated plan from this man. Rothstein's involvement, though widely agreed upon now, is extremely hard to trace. This was a man who knew what he was doing. Even during the trial, you could call the big bankroll's participation an open secret. Multiple times through questioning, different people stood up and questioned why these ball players, clearly taken advantage of, were being tried, while the Arnold Rothsteins of it all, the real big fish, sat at home. The truth was, though no one would have admitted it there, is that they just couldn't get enough on him. They had tried. Last year, after Shoeless Lefty and Sika all confessed, Arnold Rothstein was summoned to testify himself because his name kept coming up. But like a crime boss does, he walked into the courtroom, told them everything they wanted to hear, not a letter more, and walked out. When he left the courthouse, almost everyone in it was convinced that Arnold Rothstein was innocent. He spoke like a poet and lied like a gambler. He would never be officially questioned on the Black Sox case again the rest of his life. In fact, the man who got rich off gambling, bootlegging, and selling drugs never spent a single day behind bars his whole life. When he was shot at age 46, he refused to identify the hitman on his deathbed, even though he knew, staying dirty till his last breath. When Rothstein died, subsequent searches through his empire revealed a lot more evidence connecting him to the 1919 World Series. His most famous involvement is around the theft of those confessions. Most believe it to have been carried out by either Rothstein or Kamitsky. Some, suggesting an alliance between the big bankroll and the old Roman, believe the two even worked together, possibly benefiting from Kamitsky's Chicago connections and Rothstein's underworld knowledge. They both obviously had reasons to hide those confessions. Much later in his life, Shoeless Joe and his wife ran a shop called Joe Jackson's Liquor Store. One day, the baseball legend Ty Cobb walked into the place with a friend and bought some booze right over the counter from Joe himself. Shoeless showed no signs of recognizing Cobb. He rung him up with a half smile like he was any other customer. Finally, Ty quietly perked up. "Don't you know me, Joe?" "Sure, I know you, Ty, but I wasn't sure you wanted to know me. A lot of them don't."